Welcome everybody again to the latest version of Common Sense HD. I just want to remind you of a few things before we start this show. The first thing is don't forget the website, commonsensehd.com. Secondly is that there are a number of upcoming shows that I think you'll really appreciate. One of them involves the Burlington Police, which I'm very grateful that have consented to appear and talk about motorcycle safety. And sometime in the near future, State Rep Ken Gordon has assented to participate with us on Common Sense HD and talk to us about what it's like in his new role as state representative. But today's show is with our guest, Stephen Lewis, who's a union activist and union poster collector. And I think that when you see these posters, you're going to be as amazed and just taken back as much as I was. Here's Stephen to tell us a little bit about himself and his career, and then we'll start with the posters.
Well, thank you for that nice introduction, Rick.
You're welcome.
So myself, I am a trade union activist, have been for many years. Retired recently from SEIU Local 509.
And what is SEIU?
Stands for the Service Employees International Union.
Okay.
And my local in particular is about 16,000 members statewide.
Oh, wow.
In mostly human service, education, childcare.
Mm-hmm.
And I was the treasurer there. And so I guess I came to the point of being a poster collector somewhere along the line of having gone to some union conferences or some international conferences and seeing some posters there that I particularly liked. So I grabbed a copy of each of them and brought them home.
Mm-hmm.
After a few years of that, I sort of had this critical mass, and they were sitting in my attic, and I said, well, why not share them with people?
Mm-hmm.
So I started trying to raise some money, getting some low-budget frames for them, and contacting some places to arrange exhibits, particularly public libraries.
Mm-hmm.
And now that I've retired, I can do that full-time.
Well, that's fantastic. And I'm really grateful for you to appear here to show us these posters, because I think they're an important part of our society in their representation and the symbolism of what has gone into people as they strive to improve this country. And I think that there are several posters that have I identify as my particular favorites, and one of them is the AFL-CIO poster. I think you might understand which one I'm talking about. So how does a trade union work? Maybe a little bit about that, so that people will have an understanding of why people stand collectively to assure their rights as workers and citizens of this country.
Sure. Well, let me first say thank you very much. It's nice to meet someone who appreciates poster art, graphic art, and certainly there's a long history of creating posters to communicate ideas. Back at the time of both the Russian and the Chinese revolutions, the new communist governments used poster art as a way to communicate to a lot of illiterate peasants who couldn't read articles, and so they would depict ideas through posters. And posters were a very popular way of communicating, particularly ideas about change in a lot of countries, including in the labor movement.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but the labor movement basically is a vehicle for workers to come together to work on issues of job protection, job security, health and safety on the job, better wages.
Mm-hmm.
And the history goes back to the 1800s, but unions really came into their own along with the Industrial Revolution, where you had a lot of people leaving the land and coming to the cities and to factories. And basically you would have a lot of people who weren't necessarily well educated, who were looking for work, and they would take jobs in these factories where the working conditions were really horrible. Just to cite one example, last year was the centennial anniversary of the famous Bread and Roses strike up in Lawrence, Massachusetts. Back in 1912, you had a lot of particularly young women, immigrant workers working in the factories up there, working for very minimal wage, working long hours. And some new owners took over and decided to cut the wages even more. And so the women organized and marched out of the factories. It was a very well-supported departure from the factories, a strike, and the state eventually called in the National Guard. A couple of workers were killed in the struggle. And the theme Bread and Roses came out of the women asking for more money, wages, which was the bread, to put bread on the table, and sort of the old concept of stop and smell the flowers. They wanted more leisure time, so hence Bread and Roses.
Oh, okay, that's great. That's fantastic.
And so last year, Lawrence celebrated the centennial. But you also had other famous strikes, let's say, in the auto plants.
Right.
Out in Michigan, Detroit. The workers actually occupied the plants and refused to work until their conditions were met. Before workers started banding together, if a worker wanted more money, they would go individually to the boss and say, oh, please, I can't live on 25 cents a day. I've got a family. I can't feed them. And the boss would say, look, you've got 10 unemployed people out there. They'll take your job for that wage. So
Right.
you either accept what I'm paying you or you leave. And so the unions gave workers some clout on the job.
Okay, that's fantastic. Hey, Joan, could we get the first poster, please? Which I think is the Bread and Roses poster.
Okay. It's a Bread and Roses poster. It's actually a Canadian poster, and it talks about the death of some workers up there.
Okay.
But they take the graphics from the old Bread and Roses strike.
Okay, that's fantastic. Could we get the next one?
By the way, I'm actually going up to Ottawa next month to speak at an international conference about the posters. And this is from a fairly well-known artist who created a number of posters that relate to working people. The poster itself is the middle piece there, I guess with the image blown up again on either side.
Right. Corey was kind enough to do the graphics, and one of the things he found out was that because of the way the images were, they didn't fit well on TV without.
I see. Well, thank you, Corey. And that poster was also part of a series of images of labor that were created by SEIU, the Bread and Roses Project. Speaking of Bread and Roses.
Wow, that's fantastic.
They borrowed the name also.
Yeah. Can we get the next one?
These are actually, this is a picture that made into a poster from the Memphis sanitation workers strike. This was the strike that Martin Luther King Jr. went to Memphis to help support the workers. And so these are the workers out picketing with all carrying signs, I am a man.
Right, and this was a very famous period of time, and because it also involved the blockade by the workers of Memphis in an attempt to keep him secure, supposedly.
Yeah, yeah.
So what are some of the things that are important points of time for the unions that you come to your mind?
Well,
I mean, we all know one of them, and we're still wondering.
I mean, I guess the first thing that comes to mind would be the PATCO situation, where the PATCO workers, the air traffic controllers, their union was called PATCO, Professional Air Traffic Controllers Organization, and in an attempt to get a better contract, they went out on strike, and then President Reagan fired them all. And so which is really ironic, because here's a guy who was a member of the Screen Actors Guild, another union, and so that tells you what he thought about unions. So the AFL-CIO called for a day of solidarity in Washington, and I remember personally going down to that. A lot of my colleagues from my union went there, and we had just tens of thousands of people in Washington on a very hot day, people wearing their union T-shirts, their colors with signs, just demonstrating against this mass firing of the air traffic controllers. But that pretty much devastated them. He brought in air traffic controllers who were working for the military, and actually another, besides wages, a big issue for the air traffic controllers was the stress on the work, because they had so much air traffic that they were trying to keep safe.
Right.
So it was really not only a safety thing for them, but from the stress, but safety for us as passengers in the air.
Well, one of the things I think, I don't know very much, but is they've actually cut their hours, not because they were attempting to reduce the hours for a cost-saving issue because of the stress issue. And because there's been certain issues as well now at smaller airports that maybe don't have union employees where they found the air traffic controllers asleep.
That's not very good, but
No.
but anyway, you know, so big moments tend to be the dramatic things around strikes or major contract negotiations. I guess something that's not a strike, but would be the Teamsters negotiations with UPS, which employs a lot of truck drivers. And so that's a big issue, and the Teamsters organize nationally to strengthen their side in the negotiations, their position in the negotiations.
Well, I know one issue of union involvement that everybody may be aware of, but nobody's aware that there's union involvement is Saturday mail.
Yes, absolutely. There was just a rally on Sunday, this past Sunday, on the Boston Common in support of the postal workers and the post office staying open on Saturdays.
Saturdays, right,
Yeah.
Saturday mail. And so that's sort of like the story behind the story. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of opponents take advantage of is that the public has not had the time to actually get all the story. And even though I read both the Globe and the Herald every day, I go to another newspaper and I find out even more than what I knew by just reading the, and I only read the electronic versions, but I do read them.
Well, you know, you raise a very good point that some people who aren't particularly enamored of the labor movement or don't understand it feel that workers and unions are just out for themselves, trying to get more money, and particularly the public sector, just take taxpayers' dollars. And the reality is that a lot of unions, the things they're advocating for not only benefit their own members, but they benefit the general public. You're in nursing. One of the big issues in nursing in the hospitals is staffing ratios. The Mass Nurses Association, which I know you've been a member of in the past, they've got legislation to try to set a ratio of how many patients that nurses have to care for. This is an issue for the general
Right, well,
public.
they just won on mandatory overtime, that they can't just walk up to you at the end of your shift and say you're not leaving.
Well, again, it's a public safety issue, because if you're like falling asleep on the job because you work so many hours, then how attentive can you be to the patients you're caring for?
Right.
Air traffic controllers, it had to do with keeping the air traffic safe. I mean, you could cite numerous issues around that. My union, SEIU Local 509, we're organizing in the private sector human service area. And in human services, one of the most important products, so to speak, of the job is the relationship between the staff and the people that they're caring for. And if you have low wages, then you have a tendency to have a lot of turnover among the staff. And so that severs that relationship. So it really harms those very vulnerable clients.
Can we get another poster? Oh, this is one of my favorites. I don't know what it says.
Well, I think you'll appreciate even more. This I got from Spain. It's from an organization called the Left Bloc. And I'm sorry, not from Spain, from Portugal. And it says, don't rob or don't steal. The banks do not like competition. And
It's sort of what we thought it said.
And I have this in my, I have an exhibit that a theme I call the 99% resist. And so part of that resistance is to these banks foreclosing on homes, making all this wealth, not circulating in the population, and basically being part of the 1%.
Right. Nothing we've heard about in this country lately.
So, but I found this group in Portugal did some very nice posters, and that was one
no,
example.
I really like that one. How about another one, Joan?
This is an old one from this country, a union barbershop, and believe it or not, back in those days, a number of barbershops were unionized. I actually go to one in Malden, and just recently, and turned out that this guy also had a union poster in his barbershop.
Yeah, I remember the discussions of union barbershops, and they had something to do with the shaving cream and stuff like that. That all the materials were union made, and I remember the leather Stryth or whatever they called it. That would have a stamp on it that said union made.
Yeah. And they one of the things they advocated for was better training for the barbers.
Right, hygiene issues.
Exactly.
Because bartenders used to be surgeons, so. Could we get the next one, please? This is my favorite one.
Okay, this is a Teamster poster. They're actually part of a series where they talked about some of the attributes of the union members, in this case being vigilant on the job.
Well, the reason why I like this one so much is this is clearly in the 60s, and here's the unions showing their sort of color camaraderie. There's not an issue of all white or all black. They're protesting